12 days after the election, President Trump still refuses to concede or to begin the transition to President-elect Biden. But so far, at least, his legal challenges to the vote count have had little success. We want to discuss the state of play with two of the country's top legal minds, former independent counsel Judge Ken Starr and Lawrence Tribe, a Harvard constitutional law professor. Professor Tribe, before we get into specific cases, what do you think of President Trump's overall effort to litigate the election and to hold up the transition in the meantime?
I think his overall effort is dangerous, even though we know it's going to fail. The Republicans themselves know that President Trump's claims that Biden's votes were fraudulent are without merit, because if those claims were true, then those Republicans, too, would have been elected fraudulently or mistakenly, because they were the same ballots. Now, if we know that Trump is going to lose in the courts, and we do, why should we care? The reason we should care is that he is undermining democracy, because there are millions of people who will believe him, even though there is nothing in his arguments and no evidence to back them.
Let me bring in Judge Starr. A Department of Homeland Security committee of federal, state, and local officials issued a statement this week. I want to put some of it up on the screen. They called the election the most secure in American history and said there is no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised. Judge, what do you think of the president's effort to hold up the transition while he litigates the election vote counts?
It's a very important process, and what we've just heard from the distinguished Professor Tribe, I think, gives new meaning to rhetorical hyperbole. Our system is designed to check. Let's check it out. And a lawsuit was filed just on Wednesday in Michigan. Let's let this process run. A lawsuit was just filed by the legendary Lynn Wood in Georgia. Don't mess with Lynn Wood. Let's find out. In the United States, we allow the jury to hear all the evidence, and that's what's happening right now. Don't rush to judgment. It's important, especially given the fact that so many tens of Americans feel right now disenfranchised. So let's get the facts in, allow this litigation to run its course, just as in Bush v. Gore, it ran for 37 days.
Okay, Judge Starr, it is now 12 days since the election. What is the best single case that you think the Trump legal team has out there, and would it be of a sufficient dimension? Would it switch enough votes in that one state to overturn the vote count and the electoral vote in that state?
Well, let's just take Michigan. The lawsuit that was filed, and again, we have to let the lawsuit run its course. The lawsuit, if it is meritorious, that's the if, we need to know, would change over 1 million votes. In Georgia, ditto. And of course, Georgia itself has a state audit underway. That's exactly right. There will be a recount in Georgia. If you take all these together, Pennsylvania, allegations in Pennsylvania, these are allegations. What we do know is in Pennsylvania, as Justice Samuel Alito indicated, I'm going to embellish here, utterly unconstitutional. And we've seen changes, including Gavin Newsom in California, just condemned by a state court judge for doing what he did, this unprecedented flood of mail-in ballots. All the more reason why in this election we need to check.
Professor Tribe, I got presidents on the mind these days. You say that President Trump's lawsuits are less than frivolous. Is there any legal merit to what you just heard Judge Starr say?
Absolutely none. He says that what I've been saying gives new meaning to hyperbole. What he's been saying gives new meaning to, dare I say it, BS. There's nothing in any of these lawsuits. He says, let the jury speak. The jury of an unprecedented magnitude, 160 million Americans, has spoken. You can file lawsuits till the cows come home. And there's no end to it, but it's nothing like Bush v. Gore. There, they were recounting, not just counting, and there was a 537 vote margin. And when the U.S. Supreme Court said it's time to stop the recounting in accord with the law of Florida, I didn't agree with that, but that at least was a legal judgment. What's being asked for now is simply to undermine the belief of tens of millions of people in the conclusion that President Trump's own Department of Homeland Security reached after looking more closely than any of these courts possibly can at all the ballots, all the processes, and concluded that it was the most secure election in American history. It's time to move on. We know that Trump won't. He's going to be out there yelling and screaming and complaining.
Gentlemen, let me ask you about another possible legal strategy that we know that President Trump has actually discussed. And the idea would be to tie up the recounts, the vote counts in several states so that the secretaries of state in those various states would not be able to certify electors. And then the argument goes that state legislatures, in these cases Republican state legislatures, could step in and they could certify Trump electors and override the will of the people in that state who had elected by a majority Biden electors. Whether you think that's going to happen or not, Judge Starr, is that constitutional?
Well, the legislature does have the ultimate authority, as we know, under the Constitution, to determine how the electors are chosen. However, in each of the states, there are going to be state laws that cabin that discretion. And I've seen that a number of Republican legislators in different states, at least 4 states, have said, we would not do any such thing. So I think it's more of a theoretical possibility. If I may respond just very briefly to what Larry said earlier, I'm really astonished that his view is every one of those votes is a legal vote. And I think that's the underlying assumption, and that assumption needs to be tested. We had this unprecedented use, this flood tide of mail-in ballots. And what we do know, everyone has heard, if his or her ears are open, anecdotal evidence, anecdotal, not proof, anecdotal evidence that people who should not have received those ballots received them. Lots of stories. Let's test the stories as opposed to dismissing them and then saying, with all due respect, that this is a dangerous process. No, this is a lawful process. This is to bring the rule of law into the election process, and then let's accept the judgment of the courts once the courts have ruled. Larry may be right, but he may not be right.
Professor Tribe, really 2 questions there. First, mine, which is this idea of state legislatures coming in and overriding the will of the people in that state, and in these cases where Biden is ahead, choosing Trump electors rather than Biden electors. And then also, if you could respond to Judge Starr.
Sure. As to the first, I think Judge Starr pretty much had it right. That is, these state legislatures have made clear they are not going to risk their own political future by trying to override the overwhelming views of their own constituents. And besides, the state legislature is itself a creature of state law, and under those state laws, the governors have veto power. As to the point that Judge Starr has just made about these anecdotes, I've heard the anecdotes. When they're tested in court, every one of them has been shown empty or has been withdrawn. There are cases all over the country of people saying, whoops, I made a mistake. So the fact is that these anecdotes have already been tested in court. The Trump legal team is about 1 for 19 in terms of outcome. Let's get on with it. We've had a peaceful succession ever since Adams turned the presidency over to Jefferson. It's time to move on. And I don't think Judge Starr has ever answered the point that it undermines democracy to get tens of millions of people to believe in a conspiracy theory that is empty.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Judge Starr, Professor Tribe, thank you both. Thanks for your analysis. And of course, we'll all be watching as the legal battle continues. Thank you, gentlemen. Up next, we'll bring in